you get on stage, it's like, oh, it's go time, so you're like, you're amped up and you're ready to go. And these people on the other side have been sitting in an air-conditioned dark room in a comfy, padded hall chair for 3 hours, right? Their heart rate is low, and their sense of time and pulse is not amped up like yours is.
What a pleasure to have Joe McFadden on the podcast today. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting with Atlanta Symphony principal bassist Joe McFadden, who has had a great journey through the music world. He was in the section in Atlanta before becoming principal there. He was in the Alabama Symphony before that. He has just done so many things. He's from California, studied with Bruce Bransby and Chris Hanulik, two past podcast guests, and we dig into all kinds of interesting territory about being yourself as a musician and a bass player and what that can do and what kind of an impact that can have on your auditioning and so many other aspects of your musicality, the experience of being in a large studio versus a small studio, the Indiana University experience, and so many other great topics. I know you're going to love this conversation with Joe. And before we dive in, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Robertson and Sons, Upton Bass, and D'Addario Strings. They are our sponsors for this episode. I can't wait to bring you this conversation with Joseph McFadden of the Atlanta Symphony.
And how are you?
Good. How's it going, Joe? How are you doing?
Doing good, thanks.
Nice. How's life in Atlanta right now?
Life in Atlanta is good. We're doing like a really weird run of Candide shows, okay, which is interesting. It's super fun because like the Alliance Theater, which is like under the same umbrella as like the Woodruff Arts Center, they're renovating their space. And so they're kind of on the road like all year. And so we're doing a show with them while they're on the road of Bernstein's Candide.
Nice. I did a run. They did a musicalized version of Candide, like a real small pit, no conductor, just from the piano, was that the Chicago Theater, or was that one of those theaters in Chicago? And it was kind of interesting I was just subbing in on that, but that was an interesting show to do, or a musical to do in that kind of way. It's really
funny. It's real. I mean, the orchestra is just laughing like throughout the entire thing. It's really great. And we're like on stage with them and everything. It's set up very weird. Like Robert Spano is like, he's actually like stage right facing stage left on a really elevated podium, because the orchestra is split in two. Like the string section is right in front of him, and then there's a huge 30-foot gap where the actors have space, like a huge set design and everything. And then there's the winds, brass, and percussion behind him. So you've got like orchestra here and then orchestra over here. And in the middle is like where all the action happens, and everybody's facing that way at Robert. Wow. So it's pretty funny. Like it's a good show. Like, and it's making everybody laugh a lot. It's really hard to stay focused.
Is that last number? Is it "Make Your Garden Grow"? Is that the last? Am I thinking
that's the last one?
And I remember like being there, and the singers that just came up for the production in Chicago, they're just singing their lungs out. I mean, it's such intense, cool, a cappella bit at the end, and it's really
great. It's really good. So yeah, but I mean, we're doing that, and things are kind of like we got a couple subscription weeks left, and then I head out of here after that and go to like a couple festivals, and then the summer happens, and it's mayhem in the summer too. It's just busy, busy, busy all the time.
What's the schedule like for the symphony in the summer? Do you have some performances,
we don't have anything in the summer. So like it's just like 10 weeks off, essentially, which has become extremely busy anyway. Usually I make the trip out to California and stuff like that every summer. Like I play in the Cabrillo Music Festival out there, which is all new music. Yeah, actually it's by you in Santa Cruz. And what's it called? I do that for a couple weeks. But that, since I'm from California, it's like I just stay out there with my family and see friends and stuff like that, and like drive the dog and the bass. It's like pack up my life basically and go out there. And
that must be a kind of a fun contrast, the like Atlanta to Santa Cruz. I'm teaching this quarter at UC Santa Cruz actually, so I've been headed down there.
Nice.
and like there's no mellower vibe than spring quarter at UC Santa Cruz. Let me tell you.
Yeah. Santa Cruz is so awesome. It's the grungiest hippies can get, I feel like, is what Santa Cruz really is. Like the population, or like the people that like make up the city are so awesome, in so many different ways. They're just like super, like just kind of open-minded to everything, and like just really far out in general. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Yeah,
I do.
You kind of live in like the greatest place on earth. I hope you know that. So you should really, really appreciate it.
Well, I'm learning to not to post in December to my Midwestern friends, try to keep the palm trees off of my Instagram and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You rub it in their face a little bit.
Are you from LA proper, or I know you're from SoCal. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Studio City, California, which is like part of the San Fernando Valley. Mm-hmm. So we lived there until I was like 10 years old, and then we moved out to the Valencia Newhall area, which is like the Santa Clarita Valley. Yeah. And so we stayed out there till I was moving to go to Cal State Northridge, and like then I moved out because I went to Santa Monica College first for 2 years, like after high school, because I didn't know what I was going to do.
Yeah. What were you thinking you were going to do when you're at Santa Monica College? Were you thinking bass performance? Were you thinking music? Were you thinking something else?
I didn't really know. I mean, like, because my mom's a bass player, so that's how. But she plays bass guitar. She says she dabbled playing, double bass like when she was a kid. But she always played bass guitar, and she moved out to LA to play in bands and stuff like that. And, that's how she met my dad, because my dad's a guitar player and piano player and singer songwriter. They played in bands together forever. So like, so I always played in bands when I was a kid. That's how I started. She taught me how to play bass guitar when I was like 7 or 8 or something like that. Teaching me a bunch of Nirvana songs and, whatever else I want to listen to, in 4th grade, like Green Day and all that kind of stuff. And, and so I started playing, double bass when I was 11 or 10, I want to say. And, I just did it because I already played bass guitar. So I thought, well, I might as well learn this other bass too, because, I'm good at bass guitar. That should come really easy to me, right? And I was like super wrong. Obviously, it was much more difficult and everything. But so I didn't really know. Like I always played in bands like crazy when I was in high school, junior high school, even just rock and punk rock and stuff like that, and thought that was what I was going to do. Yeah. And then when high school came to an end, I was still I still always was taking lessons, on bass, but not really taking it super seriously. And so when I was graduating high school, I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep doing this. I don't know what else to do. So I'll pursue music in some avenue or another. 'Cause it's not like, I mean, I knew that I wanted to play music to or do music for a career in some form or another, but wasn't sure as to like what path I was going to go down with that, So, and I was just a terrible student in high school, like did not take anything seriously, didn't take college required classes or anything like that. So I went to Santa Monica and just continued to study music. And they had actually a buddy of mine was going to go down there, and it was Santa Monica from where I was living was in morning commute traffic is 2 hours.
Yeah.
So
it's a rough 2 hours.
It was a rough 2 hours, down the 405 freeway and the 5, over the Sepulveda Pass. It was that's like a 35-minute drive when there's no traffic, and it's 2 solid hours as soon as 6 a.m. hits. It's going to take you 2 hours to get there.
That's a great way to start your day too. Yeah, like the white knuckle kind of frustrating driving.
Yeah, so I got hip to the idea that if I was on the road by 5:30 in the morning, that I could get there and there wouldn't be any traffic. So I would get there in half an hour and just be at school at 6, and either sleep in my car next to my bass because I had a big Dodge Durango, and I had a pillow back there, and so I would just get to the school and sleep next to my bass because that was a better use of my time than sitting in the car, listening to the same terrible radio stations in the morning every day. Sometimes, I was there sometimes 7 days a week. It seemed like it was crazy.
Maybe that's a universal trick in the United States, but I had the same exact thing in Chicago. I realized if I left at 6, my commute could take 2 hours. If I left at 5:30 or even 5:40, it would be the shortest possible commute, no traffic. And that was just like that. And it was this at least in Chicago, it was this exponential thing. If you don't get out in time, then the traffic piles on and it gets slower and slower and slower and slower. And I had a lot of first guy in the door at the places I worked, just trying to avoid that sort of.
Yeah.
So you were there 2 years, and then Cal State Northridge?
Right. Yeah. So I was there for 2 years. I mean, yeah. And so when I started going to school at Santa Monica, my friend was the one who said, "Hey, come to school with me out there." He was going to do he was another buddy of mine from Santa Clarita. And he was like, "I'm going to take classes in business or something like that out there." So I was like, "This is the guy I used to play in bands with." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll just go to Santa Monica instead of the local community college or whatever." And, because it'll get me out at least, get me out of town for a while. And, I went there and checked it out with them, and they had this, what they called the applied music program. And I honestly thought it was just oh, well, this is how you audition to play in the orchestra here. And it ended up actually being a whole program of you get lessons paid for by the school, and you have to play in these master classes and do these recitals and stuff like that. And I actually had no idea what I was kind of getting myself into, but it ended up being super awesome. And they set me up with a teacher. They set me up with Tim Barr, who was he's a big studio guy in town and played in the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra and stuff. And he was very, very motivational for me. Basically told me that you can in whatever avenue you want to play music in or play bass in, you can do it. You just have to work your butt off. And I was like, okay, well, hard work is not something I'm afraid of. So I can do that. I can practice a lot, I'll just start doing that all the time, I guess. And so, yeah. And then I focused changing to oh, well, as I kind of got to know the industry more, it's wow, you can there's people that play in just one orchestra, and they get paid to just do that. And I was like, well, that sounds better. So maybe I'll go for that one instead, go for that route. And so that's when I, started started researching schools I should transfer to. And Northridge was, I started taking lessons with Oscar while I was at Santa Monica. And he taught at Northridge. So I went there. And then I was there for 2 years, and that was also really awesome. That was those two things those two places were very good for me.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. Yeah.
Oscar, I've heard great things. Oscar Mesa, LA Phil bass player. I've heard great things about him. I still don't think we've ever met in person, but what was he like as a teacher?
he's amazing. He's so, I don't even know like how to describe, one of the best players I've ever heard in my life. And I mean, hands down. And at the time, he was definitely the best player I had ever heard in my life. And I still look back at those lessons and try to emulate what I was hearing at the time, because he would, I mean, I learned pretty well from copying people. And so like having somebody who was that good, just kind of grab the bass and play, at the level that he could, I was like, oh, okay. So I should sound like that. And it really instilled a good, like a good goal for me to get to, but I mean, it was insane, like to listen to him play. I would leave all of my lessons just like so like amped up, like just so like, oh my God, I can't wait to get home and like just I want to be like that. I want to sound like that. I want to have that kind of intensity in my playing, and that like, I mean, he always talks about like drawing in your listener, and playing with like keeping your listeners just like open and aware and like always keeping their attention, and how to do that. And like you're playing and make it exciting to listen to. And I mean, I'm trying to think of like how else to describe it. I mean, his style was just like so like electric to listen to. There was so much energy and so much like, even like in the softest like pianissimos and passages, it was still like really intense and like so much drama in the sounds. And I mean, it was just awesome. It was totally like, it was so beneficial for me.
Well, I like that idea.
And
like, yeah, that's very cool. Drawing in your listener. That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it was awesome. And the thing, like, Cal State Northridge being like a small state school, like with a music department, like it's not like, when I got to Indiana, which is like this huge bass school, and then, but the thing is like, and same thing at Santa Monica College, even like we'd have to do these weekly masterclass performances where you'd have to play like pretty much every other week, just like what you were working on, and get up there in front of everybody but it wasn't just bass players, though. That's the thing. It's like at Santa Monica, it was like singers and jazz singers and classical guitar players and violinists. And like it was basically everybody who was in that program, which I think really actually helped, because they're all scratching their heads like, I don't understand. Why doesn't that sound good? Because like, because bass is a really hard instrument to play. And it's, I mean, when you play for a bunch of bass players, I sometimes feel like it's a little bit more forgiving.
Yes.
Because they understand the awkwardness of the instruments and, why things are difficult and stuff. And like an oboe player does not care. So, that was, that kind of really, the dog running by, that kind of really raised the bar for me, being like, oh, well, I have to sound as good as every other musician in this room. And then when I got to Northridge, it was the same thing, except, I mean, more condensed, but it's like we had strings masterclass. So it wasn't just playing for bass players. Still, it was like, you'd have to get up and play after some violinist had just crushed some like Bach violin partita or something like that, and then you were held to the same standard. Yeah. And of course, it never went that way, but you tried as hard as you could to make it be as good as they sounded. And, it was good. It was very good for me.
Well, that's interesting, because those are two very different school environments, right? Like the small Santa Monica or Northridge, and then you go to like what's probably almost the polar opposite, Indiana University, with the multiple orchestras and
right.
What are some, since you've done both, and a lot of people going to school or thinking about going to school listen to this, like what are some advantages and challenges maybe of the small school environment? And then the Indiana University kind of large, multifaceted program environment?
I think that both are great.
Yeah,
both are really cool. When I got to Indiana, it was awesome that I had like 30 good friends all of a sudden. Because there was like 30 or 35 people like there playing bass at the time. Which is a huge number, and it was actually great. Like. We like I never had that like in undergrad and stuff. So I mean, I always hung out with I always had a varied group of musicians. Like I played like a lot of jazz when I was in undergrad and stuff like that too. Like that, I learned how to play jazz like at Santa Monica just because like, hey, because I was the only bass player for a long time there. And so they're like, hey, we need a bass player. Come jam with us. And I just figured it out. Like they just kind of showed me the ropes on like how to play. But anyway, so when I got to, Indiana, it was like all of my friends were now just bass players, which I was really into at the time because I never had that before. But now looking back on it, like, I mean, I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other. They're just different, and I think they both had positive influences on me for sure. I mean, especially like when I got to Indiana, it was, I mean, I was just like, I just remember like seeing the first recital that since I had gotten to school there, it was one of my best friends, Brian Johnson, was playing his undergrad recital. And I just remember just being like, holy hell, like that's what I have to sound like. I mean, it was incredible, like to watch somebody like that just play with that kind of virtuosity. And just the list of people who were there at the time that I went to school with, like went on and on, like all these like super virtuosic players, like, I mean, listening to like Ben Jensen and Rich Ryan and Emily Honeyman. I mean, like all these, one of my other good friends, Dave Milburn. And I was just, I mean, just, it was a serious wake up call being like, wow, okay, so I've got a long way to go, to get, to be on these guys, on everybody else's level here. I mean, it was, so, I mean, yeah, when I got to school there, it was definitely a big eye opener for me.
Were you starting to take orchestra auditions, like professional orchestra auditions, right upon getting to Indiana, or had you done that prior to going to Indiana? When did that fit into the picture?
I took my first orchestra audition, like I think in my second semester in school there. Mm-hmm. Like, I studied with Bruce Bransby, and he was just basically like, you should be doing this, and I was just like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't, again, like this whole thing was kind of, new to me. And I didn't really know, like, at what age do you start doing these things? Yeah. And blah, 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 So he was just like, yeah, it's time to start doing this. I'm like, oh, okay. So I took my first audition in Seattle, I think my second year.
This episode is brought to you by Robertson and Sons Violin Shop. And here's a clip from Robertson Shop founder Don Robertson on how the fingerboard has an effect on the tone of a double bass.
When you think of the vibrating string, it vibrates on top of the bridge, but it also vibrates at the upper end. And the mass of the fingerboard can enhance or distract from that vibration. So we never know what it's going to do acoustically until we get it on there. The setup, the arching of the fingerboard, the camber, and the arching from side to side is also very critical. We see fingerboards with too much arcing, but when the player is playing, he feels like he's falling off. If it's too flat, then string rattles. So it's a headache.
Getting your bass set up properly is a tricky business for sure, but Robertson's does a fantastic job of that. Learn more about everything they have to offer at robertsonviolins.com. So you're kind of, getting through that first round early on, taking the auditions, it sounds like. So it was, because some people I talk to, it's like, don't advance, 24 auditions later, suddenly advance. So what, and it's interesting because you started, like you're saying, a lot of this standard rep, kind of on the later side from what a lot of people do. What do you think, and this might be an impossible question to answer, but what do you think what did you do at IU that sort of got you to that point? How were you working on that stuff? How did you, and you're not the first person I've talked to at IU that has like really accelerated through that rep. So I don't know if it's something just like in the nature of that place or Bransby's teaching or Bransby and Hurst, but what do you think got you into such an accelerated mode where you could learn that stuff and be advancing right off the bat?
There's certainly an amount of just dumb luck for sure. Just because, let's see, how do I explain this? So I think that I already had because of studying with Oscar, my opinions on what I wanted to sound like were really set. I had an idea in my head as to this is what I need to sound like from studying with him, because he was just so good. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try as much as I could to sound like him. And so as far as my interpretation of articulation and bow strokes and vibrato or, just dynamic contrast and stuff, those were all put in place. But it was just, Bransby was really good at, I'm going to steal a Dave Moore quote here because I've heard him say this on your podcast before, but I think he says you have to stare at your own shit and take a big whiff or something like that.
Exactly. That is it. Yeah.
Right. And so that was, Bransby was so good at making me do that, and just because all I'd walk into a lesson and I'd have to play this list of things, and it was all being recorded on video. And then he'd just make you sit there. And as soon as you were done, he wouldn't even say anything. He'd just make you sit there and watch it, and I'd just be like, man, I really don't sound as good as I think I do, and there's just there would just be too many rhythmic inconsistencies, too many intonation inconsistencies. Really, the sound wasn't what I wanted it to be, or I wasn't making good contact with the string at certain times or whatever. It was really because when you're practicing by yourself and then you just play it for somebody without really having to stare at it and analyze it and just nitpick it to death, your awareness isn't as high. Your awareness is just higher when you have to watch yourself do what you just did. And so you just become super hyper aware to every single little intonation thing that's not there, or every single little thing that rushes and isn't perfectly in time, and doesn't have that feel to it or something like that. It's your, the bow strokes are there and, the sound is there and the idea is there, but it just needs to be more, more polished, like an ice sculpture, it needs to, or any kind of sculpture or something like that. There's too much dust here and these edges aren't refined enough or something like that. You have smoothing it all over. And he was really good at that. And I think I really, I've always been a hard practicer, but when I got there and started having to week after week, watch myself not be as good as I thought I was, that made me work a lot harder, and that I was on the bass, getting ready for that first audition, every second I had, I was just playing because number one, I didn't know this repertoire as well as I needed to. Number two, I just wasn't as good as I needed to be, but week after week, it would get better and better and better. And by the time I'm up there, still not ready to roll, they were getting closer, and it was and I just got up there with that, that first kind of audition mentality, well, let's just see what happens and just let her rip, and it worked out. And then the second round didn't work out, but, either way, it was a good first experience of okay, so this is what this process is like, this is how this is going to feel going forward, and then trying to change that, the procedure or the the way that you prepare differently, hopefully for every single one, trying to make it better and better.
So there's a favorite topic that people ask about, like that approach to preparation. And, I went down when I was living in Chicago and took some lessons with Bransby, and I remember being videotaped and watching my Beethoven 5 and thinking like, wow, okay, learning a lot here, and that hyper awareness. And then like how and we could go lots of directions with this, but so you have this more information, you're more hyper aware. How does that change your preparation in the practice room? Or maybe a better, like how did your preparation evolve as you were studying with Bruce and as you were starting to take auditions? Like how do you address all that new information that you're getting?
Well, maybe a good thing to talk about is like, for my tactics anyway have changed so much since then. It's like, because I just won this audition in September. So September of 2017 versus my first audition, which I think was like, that Seattle audition was in February of 2008, I want to say. So that's like almost 10 years of like how I've learned to prepare and stuff. And at the time, I think I've never been a super well organized person, I hate to admit. And so I was just kind of like, okay, we'll just open up the music and sit down and just play it, just play it and then take it apart and try to make it better. And, which is not always like the best way of going about something, is just sitting down and just trying to read it down over and over and over again until it starts to sound better. Like I could have been more efficient with my time back then. Now I'm a lot more efficient with how I kind of take things apart and prepare. But, at the time I wasn't slowing things down as much as I should have. I just didn't have the patience. Now I slow things down a lot. Like, but at the time it was just like, well, I'm just going to, keep practicing this until it gets better and better and better. It's kind of like the way I used to learn like songs playing guitar, or playing bass guitar and stuff like that. I would just like, just practice it. Just practice it until it's better. That was just kind of my mentality, and it was working for a while, but it wasn't it just lacked consistency. I wasn't being able to do it like, 10 out of 10 times or, or even like, half the time sometimes, it was just so hit or miss, and it wasn't working. And I think, when I did my, my graduate recital at Indiana is when I kind of like really excelled. And then like immediately after that, I got my first job in Alabama, the principal spot down there. So that was, that was different for me, was doing that recital, like still practicing just as much, but changing the way I was practicing. Like, it was just different the way I was approaching solo repertoire versus like orchestral auditions. So I think I started trying to approach the orchestral repertoire like I would a solo repertoire. I'm not sure if that's actually what I did or not, but that's kind of how I remember it in my head.
Well, that's interesting. That reminds me of talking with Jeff Turner about this. And he said that he's noticed, not just in bass players, but in instrumentalists in general, that there's a real high correlation between preparing for a solo recital and winning an audition. Like a lot of people, when they do, they've been doing something besides just hammering away at that list. Maybe they just played a recital a month. So were those two events, the winning the Alabama Symphony principal bass job and that recital, were they close together?
They were within about 2 or 3 months. Cause like I was like, I just did the recital and then I went to Aspen for a summer and, and then I came back and immediately like just straight from Aspen went to Alabama and won that, so it was like, that was just like the timeline just so happened to work out very nicely.
So then you've got full, then you enter the profession, right? And you've got your 8 service weeks and you're busy, and all the things that go along with a job like that people may or may not realize, especially being principal bass and putting bowings in, and just all of the, and another topic that people have asked that I explore with folks is that winning a job when you have a job. So you obviously continue to take auditions, or at least at some point you started taking auditions again because you moved on to the Atlanta Symphony. Were you taking several auditions or throughout your time at Alabama, or was that near the end? Or
Well, I just took, again, being still like, I won that job in Alabama, but my consistency was still not great. Because like I'd win that job I won that job in Alabama, and then immediately after that, there was an audition in San Diego, and just like totally fell on my face, like in the first round, and so like I was just still like really hit or miss. And then immediately after that audition, or not immediately after, like a year later, I didn't take an audition at all until Atlanta happened. So there was really only one audition in between Alabama and Atlanta, and it was San Diego. And then, so again, like super hit or miss, win principal in Alabama, don't advance in San Diego, win a section job in Atlanta. Like it was really, the consistency just wasn't really happening, but I was getting better. I was like at least consistently, advancing through multiple rounds in one audition at least, which was something which was eluding me even in my earlier auditions. Like, because Alabama was my 6th audition that I took, and Atlanta was the 8th one. And it was just like, it was pretty much 50-50. But at least it was getting better. Like, well, now I was like, I'd win at least, or make it to the finals at least, or something like that, So
was in terms of just because people lead busy lives, whether they're playing full time in an orchestra or they teach or they have another job or they're freelancing or whatever, and just like figuring out and we never get more time in life. So either typically less and less. Right, with family and all the other responsibilities. So how the heck do you find practice time with a full-time job, principal-based job? Like, when did you fit? Was it before rehearsal? Was it between rehearsals? Days off? Like, how would you get in the time that you needed to ultimately win this Atlanta Symphony spot?
You got to make it. You just got to make time. Like you got to, find ways to, if you got to hang out with friends less, you hang out with friends less. There's definitely, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into it. Like, anybody who takes, auditions knows just how much time they actually take. There's a lot of repertoire that has to be executed at a very high level. So it's like training for any sporting event or something like that. It's like professional boxers are training for fights 6 months before they go in there and do it. Now, that's not what I do. I don't, practice for 6 months for an audition or something like that. But it does take a lot of, it just takes so much practice, that you have to make the time to do it. It's like prepping, meal prepping is a good thing to do. So you don't have to cook a lot. If you can make something that you can eat for a week, or something like that, that's a good idea. Just like, make a big old salad or something like that all you got to do is like heat up, and that takes 5 minutes for you to eat. That's, or something like that, just to make the time to get it done. That helps me because I said, I'm not a super organized person. So, it's, when I'm getting ready for auditions, it's making the time. I just try to like cut out as much as I possibly can. Say no to extracurricular activities. That's I think the best way to probably do it, because there are just days where you're going to have to practice after a double, and that sucks. Like nobody wants to practice after a double rehearsal, but tough. You got to do it. I think my grandmother told me that once. I was complaining. I was talking to her. I was already in Atlanta, but I was getting ready for another audition. She was like, "Well, do you want it or not?" And I was just like, "Well, yeah." She's like, "Well, then go practice." And I was like, "Yeah, what? She's right. Just do it. It sucks. It's a lot of work, but tough. Get on the bass, do it."
Well, then sometimes you put in all that work, like maybe that San Diego audition or another audition, and nothing works out, right? You're bounced out of the first round, and I've certainly been through those situations, auditioning and otherwise in my life, and like you put in all that work and you don't get the result you want. How do you deal with that just psychologically, or what do you take away from those experiences when you don't advance? So many people have been in that position.
Yeah. I think that I've changed a lot in the last like just few years. I've changed like I've changed the way I do things. You know, even more recently than that. There's even like getting ready for this most recent principal audition for Atlanta. Like, I think after I won my section job here, I like almost like things got worse. Like I started being even less consistent because I remember thinking that like, okay, so I've won 2 auditions, you know, and I've always been kind of a little bit of a risk taker, I guess you could call it. Like, you know, I've always been a very, you know, tried to emulate like, you know, what I would hear, you know, Oscar play in those lessons. And like, I started studying with Chris Hanulik at Aspen for 4 summers and, you know, trying to emulate that kind of sound. And like those guys just play with like such, you know, like just such incredible amounts of energy and drama in their sound. And like, it's so captivating that I think that I was, you know, in learning from those guys, I was emulating that well, but again, my consistency wasn't good. So after Atlanta, I was like, okay, if I can just up my consistency, you know, then I should be, you know, and I've already won a couple jobs, like then I should be super awesome, right? And so I tried to change things a lot to where it was like kind of, like I noticed that like I would play better in tune if I wasn't trying to put out 100% of the sound I possibly could. You know, like if I could back off a little bit in the right hand, you know, my intonation in my left hand would be better and my strokes would be a little bit cleaner. I was my everything was a little bit more refined, it seemed like. And so like going into auditions, I'd be recording myself like constantly and listening back and seeing good progress. And then I would get up there on stage and it would just like, everything, I would just like try to crawl into this like comfort zone box, you know, where everything I thought would be cleaner and more consistent and all that stuff. And it all just would come apart. Like it would all just fall flat on its face, you know, because that's just not, and, you know, and I would get super frustrated. Like, I don't understand. Like I'm trying to like be more consistent and like back off on things, you know, and like try to like just be more kind of inside the box.
Yeah.
And that's just not, it never felt right. And I was trying to like change who I kind of naturally was. You know, I was like, I'd go to these auditions and just fail miserably and repeatedly. Like there'd be like, I wasn't even hit or miss anymore. It was just miss, you know, and it was because, or I mean, at least I think it was because that I was just not kind of like doing what I was always kind of good at, which was just letting loose, you know, and just like going for it. You know, as you know, just kind of letting her rip a little bit. And, you know, when I tried to crawl inside that comfort zone, it never kind of worked, you know? And so over like the past few years, it's like, just, you know, just be, you know, play the way you are, you know, do your thing, you know, like if you're this kind of, you know, player, then be that kind of player, or just be true to your instincts, I guess.
One thing that has impressed me about Upton Bass ever since I got to know them was how many artists there are out there that are so satisfied with the work that Upton has done for them. Here's Mark Ramirez on his experiences having Upton copy his beautiful Cavani bass.
I do a lot of moving around and giving master classes and stuff like this. I had a copy made of it by the Uptons, by Gary and Eric Roy at the Upton shop. They made a copy of it, but they made an even smaller copy. I think it's a 7/8 copy of the bass. I use it now. I use that bass for my solo playing, which I do a lot. Recently, I've been doing a lot, especially here. And it has a detachable neck. The detachable neck, man, I tell you, in Europe, it's the craze.
Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys.
I'm Jory Herman, and I'm one of the newest members of the Los Angeles Philharmonic double bass section. Last year, I began using the Diodario Kaplan strings and really love how they sound and what they can do. As a young bassist, my first memories of playing the instrument were actually on the Diodario Helicore strings, so you could say that I've been using Diodario products since about 1994. Throughout college and my early professional life, I tried many different types and gauges of strings, and even experimented with mixing and matching from different sets. I would put 3 strings from one set with the lowest string from another, or maybe just change out the top string or do half and half, but never was really fully committed to the entire set from a single brand. Kaplan strings, however, do everything that you need them to. They have a crisp articulation while remaining warm and resonant from top to bottom across all strings. They have an immediate and clear response without maxing out in the loudest section of the music, all while still being delicate and singing in the softest sections of the music. All around, they're an incredible set of strings for the orchestra bass section.
In terms of taking a risk and I'm sure you've listened to a fair amount of auditions as well as taking at this point. So, like, what's an example of a risk someone might take that would? Because the beautiful thing about a risk is it can make you stand out, right?
Right. Like that was part of the realization I had recently. Just being like, because I listened to like. We've hired some new bass players in the section, which has been awesome. Mm-hmm. And I was on a cello audition committee recently that we hired a new cellist for. And I just, I was like listening to these people play and like, yeah, there'd be people like coming through, like you get down to the final round or even in the prelims and semifinals, there's a lot of people that play inside the box and very clean and very consistently very well. And I wasn't voting for that, and like we get to the final round and it's just like, that's just not who we were really voting for, And so I kind of realized like, well, why then, then why am I trying to be like that? if I don't vote for that, and if that's not what we're looking for in the audition, then like, why am I trying to emulate something that I don't even really like, And it's not to say that I don't like it. Like, I mean, it's amazing to watch somebody like who can play. I remember watching, I forget who it was, but watching a few people play, and just being like lick after lick after lick of like an entire list of things. Just like, I mean, it's all there, like just one note at a time, just like that consistency of just perfect execution, being really in this kind of comfort zone box. I mean, it's amazing to watch somebody be able to execute time after time after time like that. And I just, for some reason, it just doesn't really work for me. Like I have to kind of let loose. And I guess like, I don't know how to describe what that feels like versus what it is to kind of crawl inside your comfort zone. But as, for me, it's more about like taking risks is more about just like listening to the music in your head, and like and just going along with it and trusting your instincts. So like if you're playing example, like the last, or if you're playing the battle scene from Heldenleben or something like that, that is not the time to be worried about shifts and, clean string crossings or accurate rhythm. That is not the time to be worrying about that stuff. Obviously you have to do that stuff, it's like all that stuff happens in your preparation before the audition, but when you get up there and it's time to play, you just got to hear that snare drum in your head, and you got to hear the trombones with you, and how the violins answer their, your moment, and they have their moment afterwards, like that dialogue in the whole orchestra. Like I just try to plug that into my head as much as I can, and just, whatever tempo that might be of whatever recording I've been listening to at the time, which at the most recent time was Vienna and Christian Thielmann. If you haven't heard that, check that out. It is awesome. It's so good. Anyway, yeah, just like listening to that, in your head and just going along with it, just like, and if it's rompous and big and robust, and you're kind of like, I mean, I think, yeah, it's like, it might not be the cleanest thing you ever did or whatever, but hopefully, you embody that character in the piece. If you're playing the second movement of Mahler 2 or something like that, you should be really going for it in the right hands, not just like in the fortissimos, but like in the pianissimos also, like that huge dynamic contrast, like take the risk, really go for that soft dynamic where it's really, really hard to control the bow. It's really hard to go from that level way up here in a Mahler fortissimo to that really intense whisper, that's like really articulate but so quiet. I think that's the kind of risk taking that like can and has got me into trouble before. But at the end of the day, when I really go for it, and I feel good about that, and if it doesn't work out, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, as long as I did what I set out to do, the rest of it's not up to me. Yeah. So that's a good thing to remember. Like, especially for me, like going into auditions after I was like taking that nosedive after I got in Atlanta, where I was like, okay, I'm just going to tighten everything up and play more consistently and just trying to, close the lid, I guess, a little bit on the energy levels. And cause, I thought things were getting better that way, but I'd always feel like crap afterwards, after I'd get up there and like try to crawl in that comfort zone, and it would just all come apart, because I wasn't being myself. And I just remember like every time I'd get out of that audition, I didn't even have to hear them say that you didn't advance. I just, I've always known immediately after I walk off stage, like, I can't believe I just did that. Like that feeling of like, I can't believe I just did that. Like you practice for however long, so many hours in a day. And then you get up there and just, and try to like, you shy away, crawl into your shell. Like that's the worst thing that you could do. And I had never, that was just not who I was. Like that was just not something I had really ever done before. And I was just mad at myself for always like trying to crawl into that trying to find your safe zone, I guess, which was not, it just was never, it wasn't working, it just wasn't working at all.
That's a quote, not about music or auditions, but it could be applied to that. It's like the worst thing is to fail at something that you don't really believe in anyway. So.
Yeah, it's true. And like, so like, and when I would just, if I was going for it and I played the way I wanted to and it didn't work out, that's another thing I've learned too from sitting on audition committees is just like, you're only in control of yourself. That is the only thing you're in control of. You can't make somebody else, vote for you. It's amazing, like what, it's amazing what you learn, like sitting on audition committees. Like, for example, like maybe this is going to be helpful to somebody out there. But the biggest thing that I noticed that gets people not advanced or not voted for right away is bad sense of pulse, bad rhythm, bad sense of pulse. And you have to remember that like your energy levels and your heart rate and your anxiety levels are so high, right? You get on stage, it's like, oh, it's go time, so you're like, you're amped up and you're ready to go. And these people on the other side have been sitting in an air-conditioned dark room in a comfy, padded hall chair for 3 hours, right? Their heart rate is low, and they're like, so their sense of time and pulse is not amped up like yours is. So when you give them a tempo to start off with, make sure that I learned to always remember to err on the backside of things. Always play kind of on the backside of the beat, really have that reserved sense of rhythm. Because they're not going to come to you. You have to come to them. You have to come to where their energy levels are, or like where their, where their sense of, I don't know how to say it, like, you got to play to them a little bit.
Yeah.
They do not share your heart rate. They don't. Yeah. So you got to come to, even though your heart rate is going through the roof, you got to come to them a little bit.
That's really interesting because, putting yourself in their shoes. Because, talk about a different thing. I've in stressful situations, I got my Apple Watch and sometimes I'll clock in and just even like my resting heart rate will be like 120 or 125 or something, in a stress. And I guarantee you, like kicking back in the chair, you've been taking notes for a couple hours, kind of goofing around when someone horrible comes in, that's a real different headspace than I've flown across the country. I've spent $1,500 on this audition. audition. It's go time. I've been working for 4 months on this. Yeah, interesting.
It's totally different. It's totally different. It's and like I said, like it doesn't, and that's something else I learned from sitting on those committees too, is that like it doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's looking for perfect. And that was something that I learned, or I took advantage of going into the principal audition here. It's just like, I'm just, and going back to what I was talking about, consistency, like, some guys are just so consistent, like they can do the same thing 10 out of 10 times in a row. It's kind of like skateboarding or something like that. There are some skateboarders that can land every trick, 10 out of 10 times in a row. And then there are just some guys that are just, they just don't have that kind of consistency. They're awesome in other ways, so like, I'm just not that guy that's going to be consistently perfect every single time. Like, I'm just not. I have other things to offer, and that's okay. And so that was something I tried to do, like going into the Atlanta audition was, out of all the preparation I was putting in for the previous auditions, for this one, I was just like, you know what? It's okay. I'm not perfect. That's all right. Just remember, just trying to remember to sell the things that I am really good at, that I do well, that I feel really good about, and letting go of the things that aren't such a big deal. The little inconsistencies that would drive me crazy when I record myself back. When I sit down and listen to somebody else play, it doesn't drive me crazy. It's probably driving them crazy, but it doesn't drive me crazy. So like trying to remember that, like, the big picture side of things, it's just like, is it musical? Does it have, is the sound quality really high? Like, are you trying to say something like in your playing like that? Does the phrase do something like does it sound lyrical and sing like a singer would sing it or something like that? Not worrying about like, oh, that string crossing wasn't very clean, or whatever, like, which is stuff that nobody talks about in the room after an audition. Like, the committee doesn't sit there and be like, he missed that one string crossing there, or like that A flat was a little out of tune, compared to the lower one. Nobody talks about that stuff. They just say that person sounded good. This guy's got really great rhythm, good pitch, great sound, great musicality, really good energy. Like, it's such broad things, at least, my experience here in Atlanta, it's kind of big picture stuff. So, when I prepared for this audition, which I changed some things. Like, I only really started practicing the list a month before this time, because I noticed that, like, in the recent auditions, I was kind of peaking a lot earlier. And maybe I'm better than I used to be. Hopefully I'm better than I used to be. Right. And so, like, I don't need as much time as I did, but I noticed that, like, things started getting weird. I'd start, like, digging myself into ruts with excerpts and stuff like that, when I was allowing myself 2 months. And this time I just said, okay, I'm just gonna do this for a month. But I was still practicing a lot before that, just like, practicing solo repertoire or stuff that I was doing for summer festivals at the time, or just, practicing anything else, and so that when I did start practicing the list, I was in really good shape, like, going back to, like, the sports analogy thing, like, athletes stay, they're in shape before the season happens, or before the big game happens, or before the big fight happens. It's like, so when, when this is going to be a really weird analogy here, like, Nate Diaz beat Conor McGregor on 11 days notice, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't have time to get in shape. He was already in shape. Right. Do you know what I'm referencing totally. Here? The MMA
I do. No,
fights?
I do. Yeah. I do. No, I follow along. So yes,
Right. Yeah. So, like, that, but that, that kind of, like, so I was in shape. Like, I made sure that, like, going, I did a recital the year before. Again, there's that correlation. Recital always leads to better musical playing in your orchestral auditions. Yeah. But I gave myself a month to prepare, this audition, and and I was like super, super analytical, like I usually am, about just like pitch consistencies, rhythm consistencies, bow strokes, making sure I was getting the right sound, making sure I was in the right part of the bow to get the right sound, and make sure that everything felt comfortable. And then as closer and closer the audition gets, just saying, forget it. Yeah. Just being less and less picky as the audition gets closer and closer, because it's, I think I'm not sure if everybody else is this way, but I always feel like, man, if I just had another week or 2 more weeks, when you get into like that window of like 2 weeks or something like that, or another week, like if I just had a little bit more time to clean up this and to clean up that, and that, like, you always wish you had more time to do that stuff, but it doesn't exist. And so, at least for me, and so I got okay with telling myself that, like, it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Just do the best you can, and I just felt more and more comfortable the more I let go of the idea of like, I've got to be perfect. Mm-hmm. Like it's never going to happen. It doesn't exist for me anyway. And making sure that you feel good, that things feel good when you play, will yield your best kind of musical playing and your best kind of energy and the best output you can possibly get. Yeah. At least for me.
Yeah, I love that. And just like giving yourself permission to just be a human and be yourself and be true to yourself and not try to be somebody else.
Right. It's okay to not be perfect. Nobody is. It's okay. Like, and I think that we all put so much pressure on ourselves, because it's like, we identify as being like, we put so much time and so much effort into being bass players and taking auditions and stuff, that it becomes like so much of who we are. And if that doesn't go well, then it means that we must be bad people or something like that, which is so ridiculous. It makes us feel so bad to fail at something that we basically invest our lives into. Yeah. And I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to let it bum me out. Like, yeah, like I'm not a horrible human being because I didn't play well one day. Right. The worst thing you can do is, if you're going to continue to take auditions and try to, move up and better yourself and stuff like that, you gotta be really good at, losing some, and which is okay. It's okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's fine. You don't have to nail it every single time. Like, it doesn't make you a terrible person. Because when you do that, when you have that high expectation, and you think it's got to be perfect, and you get out on stage and that feels like walking on eggshells or like walking on a tightrope. And nobody plays music well, like when they feel like they're walking on eggshells. At least for me, I can't. I just feel stiff, like I can't get around the bass, and my pitch suffers when I feel that way. It's just never. I lose sense of the pulse. It doesn't work, for me. So it's better for me to just kind of let her rip and go for it.
Well, these are good. Obviously, audition lessons and also life lessons too. All of this could be applied. My
girlfriend says something really great that I try to remember, is that she says, nobody's going to die. Yeah. If it doesn't go well, nobody's going to die. It's fine. It's playing music. It's live music. You want it to go as well as you possibly can, and you should have really high standards for yourself, but don't try, life is too short to be bummed out over things that in the long run are not a huge deal.
Right. Yeah. That lesson has been driven home to me in recent years because my wife's a radiologist, and she comes home and it's like, okay, you are literally doing life and death things, right? None of my decisions in a day result. The worst is if I'm teaching, someone's going to be bored. That's about the worst. Or then I play, something's going to, there's like a slight disturbance in the force. Someone might notice. So you want to be serious and take things seriously and give your all and everything. But it is, yeah, we're all going to be okay, even if we play a little out of tune.
And I'm not saying that, like, I mean, you should definitely, like, when you do let loose, like for me, for example, when if I'm thinking about intonation or rhythm or something like that, then I can no longer do those things. Right? You know, if I get like, those are the last things I should be thinking about when I get on stage. Those are the things that you think about when you're practicing, but when you get out or when you're like playing for somebody, that's not the thing you should be thinking about. You know, that's what you think about in the practice room. But as the audition gets closer and closer, you know, you think less and less about that stuff. And so even recording myself playing for people, when I was, you know, when I let go of that feeling of like just focusing on like those fundamental things like pitch or rhythm or anything like that, my pitch and rhythm are great if I'm not thinking about that stuff, because I've done the work in the practice room. But you have to like practice letting go of that stuff. You gotta rehearse, you know, that mentality of just kind of hearing the orchestra in your head, you know, and going for it. I mean, that takes practice on its own, is letting go of those, just letting go, you know, that takes practice. And when I do that, you know, my auditions are great. And when I don't do that, they're not great. You know, that always seems to be the thing for me. Cause I mean, you're just, I mean, if you're playing out of tune and you're playing with bad rhythm, it's not going to go well no matter what. So like, I'm definitely not advocating that you can get away, you know, with like bad pitch and bad rhythm. It's like, but you do, like, you can find fault in those things, or a lack of good strokes or anything. You can nitpick somebody to death and find fault if you're looking for that kind of stuff, you know. But from my experience from sitting on audition committees, like they're not looking for you to mess up, you know. They're looking for the good qualities. And actually, it's something Chris Handelick told me once. He was like, auditions are like, this is going to sound really weird, but he said they're like spaghetti on the wall. So if you take a plate of spaghetti, he said, and throw it against the wall, things are going to stick. Certain noodles will fall off of the wall, you know, but that's not what people, you know, it's the big picture of what sticks is what is going to matter at the end. You know, it's not the little tiny things that we all obsess over. They're not going to, that's not the point.
Yeah.
You know, I
love that analogy, and I can, that's a good one too.
Right.
I never have any set questions, because I just really like to think of it as like we're just hanging out, drinking a beer or having a coffee, but except one. Go back to 18-year-old, 20-year-old, whatever age Joe that you want to, and give him some advice now being principal bass of the Atlanta Symphony, all the experiences you've had. What would you tell your younger self?
Actually, if I could give advice to myself at any point, it would actually be like 4 or 5 years ago, like just like the last 4 or 5 years.
Really?
You know, yeah, because that's when I was like, you know, kind of like trying to change my instincts in a way, and like ignoring my instincts, or trying to think like, well, I would just be better if I could hone things in this way a little bit more, or something like that, and which just wasn't working. You know, it just was so inconsistent. And I think I would tell myself to be who you are as a player. You know, just you know, if things feel good this way, then do it that way. You know, but if you don't, if you're trying to be somebody you're not, you know, it's never going to feel good. And if it doesn't feel good, it probably doesn't sound good. You know, if it feels good, it probably sounds good.
I love that. I'm gonna be thinking about that in rehearsal today. Actually, I think it's a really good.
True to yourself. You know?
Joe, thank you so much. So great to chat with you for the podcast. Folks, I know that you got a ton out of this episode, and we'll have Joe back in the future. That's one of the fun things about doing a show like this, is having people back for multiple conversations, just like a talk show, right? You don't have, say, Bruce Willis on once and never again, right? They come back over and over again, and people grow and develop and move on to new projects, and there are all sorts of topics that you can explore. So I can't wait to have Joe back on, and I'd like to thank you so much for listening to these. I learned so much from having these conversations. There's something that I would love to do even if I didn't have a podcast, and just having the ability to put this out to the world and have you be able to listen to Joe and I chat about these topics, I mean, it's just this totally awesome added benefit. If you'd like to reach out to us, feedback at contrabassconversations.com will get you in touch with me, and I love hearing from people that listen to the show. I'm staring at a map of the world right now. I'm recording in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I'm from, instead of my normal San Francisco pad, and I'm just looking, and I'm looking at all these different countries, and just about every country on this map, I have gotten an email from somebody. So regardless of where you are in the world, whether it's South Dakota or Chile or Italy or Canada or wherever, reach out, say hi, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't. Contrabassconversations.com/subscribe has all the options, and there are many, so just visit that and follow along with these new episodes as they come out. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And if you're looking for a double bass, Mitch is making great instruments in the Dallas area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you today from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, normally from San Francisco, California. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.